When we last left off on playthrough history, we were discussing Pac-Man, a game whose addictive mechanics, bright colors, and iconic characters transformed it into the first blockbuster of video games. The growth of the industry was exponential, and video games became a permanent fixture of popular culture. Arcades began popping up everywhere, and everyone wanted to own an Atari 2600. It was during these brief few years in the 1980s that the video game industry began to build its modern foundation. Companies that we've all heard of began to sprout up everywhere. Perhaps the most prominent of these corporations was a Japanese company called Nintendo that had been around for nearly 100 years producing playing cards in that part of the world. In the 70s, Nintendo had expanded its business operations to include the manufacture of arcade cabinets, but they had never had any real success in the North American markets. So they turned to a young game designer named Shigeru Miyamoto in hopes that he could produce a game that would cross over into the United States. The game he came up with was Donkey Kong, and it was an immediate success across the world, despite being well known for its nearly impossible difficulty.
I really liked Donkey Kong. It was really fun. And I think I liked it a little more than the other games. Actually, that's not true. I like Pac-Man a lot. But, I don't know. I mean, it was nice having like a clear goal, because most of the time when I'm playing those games, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. So it was nice knowing that I had to get to the princess. Knowing what I was supposed to do made it more fun. It made it more difficult, but it made it more fun. Nah! Get up there. Yay, I saved the princess.
This game is particularly notable because it was the first appearance of a character who would go on to define video gaming for generations, Mario.
It's like Mickey Mouse. It's like, you know, he's so iconic that everybody knows about him, so you know about them, and so you kind of like them already, even like because you grew up, even like when you probably before I even remember, I knew who Mario was. So I like him because of that.
It also introduced us to the game's namesake, Donkey Kong, who would go on to become very famous in his own right. But this particular title is important for more than its iconic status. When Universal Studios took Nintendo to court, claiming that the game was a copyright violation of their property, King Kong, everyone thought that the Japanese company would lose the fight. The judge determined that any similarities were inconsequential and thus dropped the lawsuit. This gave Nintendo a huge upper hand in North America and resulted in a lot of its future success. While the rest of the industry was beginning to go into decline, Nintendo was ramping up for a release that we'll talk about next time.
I don't really like the movement. Like, I just felt really choppy. And when I kept trying to go up the ladder, and then I would think I'm all the way up, and then I'd stop, because I thought I was on it. And then I wasn't off the ladder. And then I would try to move, and I couldn't because I wasn't off the ladder yet, and I thought I was, and yeah.
Regardless, Donkey Kong is a quintessential part of video game history. Not only did it give us Mario and create the name Nintendo, but it also established the platformer as a viable genre, and one that would go to become one of the most popular in the very near future. Another enormous hit from 1981 was Frogger, a now classic arcade experience that brought a little quirk and humor to the gaming industry. Up until then, most games relied on relatively simple, recognizable premises. Save the galaxy, save the princess. In Frogger, you were simply trying to cross the road, and that was an interesting concept for an early video game.
I liked Frogger. I thought it was really fun. Well, not really fun. It was okay. I think it was probably the easiest controlling wise. It felt to me like the controls were probably the smoothest, and it was colorful, and there was some more detail in it than in some of the other games, and I liked kind of the urgency when playing, and I didn't want to get hit by a car, but I usually didn't, except that one time. It's not as difficult as I thought it was gonna be. I thought I was gonna die like between the cars, but I don't usually, which is nice. Ah! Never mind. Timing was a really important thing in that game, and I didn't feel that with a whole lot of the other games. I was really confused at the end when 1 minute you were drowning in the water, and the next minute you were supposed to land in the water. I didn't get that at all. Yeah, that was confusing. Why wouldn't you land? If you're gonna drown in the water, then maybe you should land on the rock. I didn't get it. Or maybe like a lily pad. Jump on the lily pad. They didn't have that either. I should have done that. I definitely think. I got frustrated, but then as soon as I got frustrated, I wanted to play again. So because I wanted to be there, but I never did. So I got one frog. That's pretty good. One frog that I had to go around.
It was also the first major hit for Konami, another Japanese powerhouse that has brought a series as varied as Silent Hill, Metal Gear, and Contra. Like Donkey Kong with Nintendo, Frogger is the game that allowed Konami to take some risks and build their empire. It's why they're still with us today. But beyond that, Frogger was just plain fun. It also signaled that these upstart Japanese companies had been able to tap into an entertainment factor that even American companies like Atari couldn't maintain. Their games were simply better. Meanwhile, in the world of home consoles, the Atari 2600 was continuing to dominate the sales charts, and if there was one game that was representative of the popularity of this system, it was Pitfall. Released in 1982, Pitfall established many of the conventions that would lead up to the side-scrolling platformer. While there was no actual scrolling per se, the player would move from the left side of the screen to the right, exploring a vast jungle filled with scorpions and crocodiles.
The alligators were fun, I guess. I mean, they were the part that I actually wanted to keep trying, but I knew I was never going to get it, because I still think that there's a little too, there's not enough time to be able to jump on all three. Not enough time to jump on all three. It's just not going to happen. Swinging over the water was fun, just because I liked watching the little guy move his legs and go, wee. Here's the thing, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, whereas Frogger, I knew I had to go from one side to the other. That was pretty obvious. But at this game, I kept moving to this, I could move either way, so I didn't know which way I was supposed to go, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I wasn't collecting anything, all I was doing was jumping over things and falling through a hole. And, that's kind of not fun. Never felt like I was on an adventure. Ever. Because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And when you're on an adventure, you usually have some kind of, goal at the end.
This was the age of Indiana Jones, so it's no wonder that this game was so popular at the time. But more importantly, Pitfall allowed for a small company called Activision to come to the forefront. Activision was formed by a number of extremely talented game designers who were fed up with not being compensated for their work on the Atari 2600. At this point in the industry, there was no such thing as a third-party developer. Companies built everything in-house. Losing some of their best employees had a huge impact on Atari, and they had no choice but to turn around and buy the game that they were selling. It just so happened that the first was Pitfall. In that sense, Activision proved that there was a market for third-party content, and soon this part of the industry would start to blossom. Designers could focus on the software and not have to worry about selling hardware. Pitfall had huge ramifications for the entire industry. Not only did it invent an entirely new genre, it invented a new way of doing business.
It reminds me a lot of Mario because it's mostly just kind of jumping and then falling through holes, which you do a lot in Mario, except those are tubes or plumbing pipes. So yeah, I can see why this was probably inspiration for something like Mario.
But this fallout between Atari and the designers that would eventually leave to become Activision was endemic of a larger problem throughout the industry. A lot of the creators were becoming uncomfortable with how much money the people on top were making and how little they were making. In fact, so much money was being made that very little attention was being paid to the quality of the experiences. And even though the Atari 2600 continued to sell, a lot of the games began to disappoint people who were playing them. Nowhere is this more evident than with E.T., a game designed purely to sell units. With the success of Steven Spielberg's blockbuster film, Atari assumed they would have an enormous success with this one. With very little time, they threw together a game based on the property and planned to release it in Christmas of 1982.
I hated it. I didn't like it at all. What? What? I kept moving around, and then I'd drop into a pit, and then I figure out, I didn't understand. Again, there was no goal. There was no point. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And I know I picked up something somewhere along the way, and I don't know. I didn't know what to do with it. I don't think it was necessary. It felt like a cash grab. It really wasn't E.T. I mean, it looked like E.T. a little bit, but I don't know who those guys were running around that weren't E.T. Those human beings, like, going, like, one in a detective hat and another one in a doctor's uniform. I just didn't understand what was going on. That being said, the detail on them was pretty good. It's bad. It's really bad. I still don't know if it's the worst, but it's really bad. Is there really anything else to say about this game?
At first, E.T. was a sizable hit, but then people inserted the cartridge into their machine and realized that the game was poorly designed. In fact, many people claim that E.T. is the worst game ever made, even if it's difficult to compare to today's more modern, realistic experiences. Even then, gamers understood that this was a terrible product, and they returned it in droves. Soon, Atari was sitting on warehouses full of E.T. that just couldn't sell. While this title is probably not single-handedly responsible for Atari's bankruptcy, it certainly made a major contribution. And even though it's a horrible game, it is very important to the history of this industry. It demonstrates the negative effects that designers and publishers will face if they choose quantity over quality.
Eventually people were just like, we can just, anybody will buy any game they like as long as it's out there, and they can be a complete success. And they couldn't, because E.T. was horrible. And yeah. So gimmicks don't always work.
With the internal combustion of Atari in 1983, many people were left wondering if the fad was finally over with, if video games were finished. But in just a few years, Nintendo would come along with something that would change the world of gamers forever. But that's a story for next time.
Don't forget to check out jetpackjoust.com, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share with your friends, and Bill Murray!